Hello, I'm Mark Tucker.
Hello, I'm Alan Furstenberg. We are Two Voice Devs.
Two voice doves.
Ha
Welcome to the Scary Developer Stories episode. So I thought that since it was close to a certain time of year, that we would talk about some stories from our own personal or near coworker experiences that would be scary developer stories.
and I feel like these are just going to be reminiscing about the nightmares that were actually real.
Yes.
That
So these are true stories that are scary, or were scary at the time.
I don't know. They're still. I mean, I'm thinking about some of the ones that I encountered, and they're still scary now.
They're still scary now. All
They
right.
they still. Some of them kept me up nights. That's for sure. Why don't you kick it off, Mark?
All right. For our first story, we are going to do drop dead data.
Ooh.
In this story, we will roll back the time 2 years ago when I was a junior developer with just 4 years experience, and I had started a new consulting job. It might not have been the first day, but it was definitely the first week that I issued the drop database command on the staging database.
Ooh.
So I had just met the team that I'm working with, trying to make a great first impression. And I had to quickly walk over to the cube where my manager was and told him I had just dropped the database.
And for those that aren't too familiar with what dropping a database means,
It's gone. Data's gone. The database structure is gone. It was just scary. It disappeared, vanishing. Whoa!
into the ether.
And so, luckily, they did have a backup of the database, and he said, "Oh, we do it all the time." I don't think they did actually all the time, but he was really nice about it. But it was sure scary that few minutes that I was sitting there realizing what I had done, issuing some different commands, making sure that yes, everything was gone, and then having to decide, well, I've got to fess up to it.
And it is scary. It is, however, a pretty common thing for early developers to do. But it's interesting, now I will, and I don't remember if I actually dropped a staging database. I think it was just a test one. Unfortunately, I don't think it was a production one I ever dropped. But I've certainly done things that have shaped me to the point where I'm terrified now sometimes of making even relatively minor changes. I will, send a message to my boss along the lines of, here's what I'm planning on doing, this. And he'll reply, you don't need my permission. You can do this. You're a senior developer. Um, but you only get there by making mistakes like that.
Yeah. And I think things have kind of changed. I think there's a lot more, granularity and what types of permissions different people can get, and they probably existed back then too and just wasn't done. I probably never should have had the permission to drop a database.
Well, but
Uh,
sometimes you need, I
yeah,
mean, that permission to drop the database is tied to the permission to create tables or other stuff. And,
yeah,
maybe you didn't, but it's pretty common to give that to people anyway. Until, of course, you
yes.
make enough mistakes like that and they fix them.
All right, that was my first scary story.
So, my first scary story is about the growing and growing DNS entry.
Whoa.
So, for those of you that are unfamiliar with how DNS works, and it worked at the time, but it still somewhat works that way. is you normally create a set of DNS records, and you give it an identifier. And the way other DNS systems know whether your DNS entry has been updated has been if this identifier is larger than the previous identifier. So for a long time, the normal routine was you use an identifier based on the date and time that you updated it, which works relatively well until you do something like accidentally put in, an extra digit or the wrong year, and suddenly, instead of your database being updated in like 2010, it was last updated in 2020, even though that's 10 years from now. So I did this and I pushed this out, and suddenly it's propagating to a bunch of other systems that don't know any better. And I point this out to my boss, and he goes, "Yeah, I've done that. No big deal. We'll just add a digit so it makes it longer than the previous one. We've got fixes to this." But it's in the same vein that, you suddenly do something and you're like, what did I just do? And how much trouble am I in? Fortunately, there are more experienced people around that do help you figure out how to do this, because we've all been there.
Yeah. Oh, that is a scary story.
It's a scary story.
So here is a story that I'm calling Death by 1,000 Pings.
Oh no. The pings, they're attacking.
So this does not happen to me. This happened to this is a story that a coworker once told me. And once again, a new situation, new environment, and they were tasked with working in a network room with different cables, and so it was handling the network of a municipality with school district computers and things like that. And they had updated the wiring such that they miswired and set up a scenario where it was pinging itself.
Oh no.
So it had caused, so you're like, it could be 1,000 pings a second, whatever. There's lots and lots of pings. So maybe, I don't know, maybe it should be a death by 1,000,000,000 pings. But it kept pinging the system and causing a denial of service attack on itself, meaning that you couldn't access any of the municipality or school computers. And it was one of those situations where it happened one day, didn't get noticed towards the end of the day, came back the next day, and everything's in an emergency mode. And nobody can figure out what's going on. And then you get that sinking feeling that maybe you were the cause of it. And so that is the death by 1,000 pings.
So here is the tale of the Big O monster. The Big O monster. So, Big O notation is in computer science. It kind of reflects the order or the magnitude of an algorithm. So we could describe some algorithms, for example, take O one time. They take a constant amount of time to run. Others may take something like O n time. So if you're going through a list, it takes as long to do as the number of items in the list, n items. Some operations, like sorting operations, might take, in really bad cases, n squared. It takes n times n number of items to sort everything correctly. That's a really bad sort algorithm. And there are some algorithms that are really, really bad, like n factorial, which is extreme.
Yes.
I'm going to tell two such stories. One of them did involve an n factorial algorithm that was implemented. We had discovered that this particular system was timing out when some people were logging in. And as we kind of looked into it further, we realized that it was people who had higher user ID numbers tended to time out while trying to log in. Whereas people who were very low in the user ID list, usually the developers, the administrators, the people who had put the system into place, they had no problems logging in. But the higher your user ID was, the longer it would take to log in. We looked at this further, and logging in is in a normal case might be order n. You need to go through every login record to find the login user ID. Okay? A really good one would do something like it hashes your login ID and can quickly look up your hash and so forth. Most don't do that though. Mostly they go through the list until they find your account, which usually isn't too bad. Or at least back then it wasn't too bad. And ON algorithms aren't great, but sometimes it's the best you can do. So, it's not too bad. For some reason that we never quite understood, the way this algorithm tended to work is it would look at the first record. When it failed, it would go to the second one. But in order to get to the second one, it would have to traverse the linked list through the first one all over again. And when that failed, it would have to go to the third one. But to get to the third one, it has to traverse the linked list of the first two, and so forth and so on. So this was an ON factorial algorithm, which was just ridiculously inefficient over a few, even if the password checking was fast, or the user ID checking was fast, which it was, when you're talking thousands of logins, that takes a while when you have to do it a 1,000 times, traverse each one previously.
Right.
So when we figured that out, we were able to replace it with a much more efficient algorithm. But it's one that we didn't catch until we had that many people, because it was working fast enough.
Yep. Working on my machine just fine.
Yeah. So that actually is the other one that we had, the working on my machine just fine. I deployed a system into production, and almost immediately the client said, "This is taking way too long." And we were confused because, we had a test system up and running. The client had tested it on the test system, worked fine there, was working fine in my development environment, it was working great everywhere. We spent days trying to track down exactly what the problem was. And the problem was that on both my local system and on the test system, the database had a few hundred items in it, which wasn't too bad. It wasn't too bad to create, several pages worth of HTML stuff. When we had a few thousand items in the database, it would load in a few thousand items into memory and then pare it down to a smaller subset of that. But it was loading in the entire database.
Oh.
And once realized that, we said, that's a lot. And we started implementing some caching, and we started implementing some limits. And, there was lots that we could do. But we didn't notice it because, again, we were working with a small set of records.
Yep.
And then after that, I made a copy of the production database, and that became my development and test database.
Yep.
So we had not the full set, but a much, much larger set.
So yeah, that's good. That definitely does lead. I think over time, it's experiences like this that kind of shape as a developer. Some of the different things, approaches that you take to different things, when you're like, oh, I probably should have a lot bigger database for my, earlier on in the process to test things out, or it's just different things, kind of best practices that you've learned, some of them from your own personal experience.
Yeah. Or, you start thinking about what are the implications of this at scale? Even if I'm not running it at scale right now, what are the implications of it at scale? Does it make sense to load everything into memory Or is that just unreasonable? Sometimes, again, sometimes you have to, but sometimes you don't. And, you shouldn't.
All right, here's my next story. Imminent Demise.
Ooh, who's imminent demise?
So we turn back the clock to the year 1999. Now, you might immediately think it's something else, but it is not Y2K, though that was happening at the time. So I worked for a company that was formerly a Lotus Notes and Domino authorized training company and development company. And they had decided that they were going to move into the world. Big thing at that time was web portals. So you could create dashboards or portals off of intranet data, connect to all kinds of different data sources, and show those on a nice dashboard. And they came out with their first version of the product based on Lotus Dominoes, and got some pretty good feedback. And they went looking for investing, and along came Microsoft, who wanted the system to be rewritten in what? Microsoft technologies. So
Of course.
so we went through and started working on a new effort, got some investment, some funding, new people joined, and that's kind of when I joined the group, was part of that phase. And I think at the time we had probably 300 employees, and we're all working on different aspects of this new this portal software system. And then it takes a little while longer than we thought to migrate over, and it takes longer, and we lose traction and burning through money, and 300 goes down to 250, goes down to less and less people. And you're like, I'm here trying to make this thing work. We're almost there. Until we had a meeting with the full company meeting, which at that time now could all be in one room. And the CEO is like, makes a casual remark, well, looks like we have enough money for one or two more payrolls. And that is how I found out that the company was in its imminent demise within just a few weeks.
That is really, really scary.
That is scary.
Now, let me tell you a tale that has not quite happened yet. I see a lot of people, more and more, starting to use AI tools to assist with their software. Develop it to some extent, or point out where there are bugs or where there are other things that they should be working with. And more are writing, just letting AI write large chunks of their code without fully understanding what it is they're doing. And recently, we had somebody in one of the help forums come to us and say, I've got this code that isn't working. Why isn't it working? And they showed it to us, and our some of our first reactions were, "Did you have an AI write this code for you?" And their answer was, "Well, yeah, of course. We found several things in it that were not good. They were wrong. It was the wrong suggestion. And two things that were complete hallucinations. At least one of those things was also a security hole. So that if it actually had gone into use, it would have, a tragic security hole. It wasn't, but it was releasing the API keys for using this API, which is just a no. It's not even you put the API key in the code. That was bad enough. But it was sending the API key out as part of what it was doing. So it was exposing the API key very, very badly. And this was suggested by the AI. So we had to explain what it was doing and why this was a bad idea. And no, this wasn't what was causing your bug. But if you had solved your bug and left this in, you would have caused some serious damage to yourself. So the precautionary tale: beware what the AI is doing.
Just because it's generating doesn't mean that it's generating for good.
I feel like we're sitting around a campfire telling these scary stories without the marshmallows to toast.
Yeah.
So, Mark, I feel like all of these scary stories they're cautionary tales in one way, but they're also reminders that there are nightmares out there in software development land, but you do wake up, and there are people that are also out there to help you through these nightmares.
That is true.
And I feel like that's a really important thing that every developer needs to remember is we've all been through nightmares. We've all been through these scary stories as developers. And, you know, turn to your friends to help you through the haunted house.
And also remember, if you're ever debugging your own code and you get the feeling like this is a murder mystery where you're the detective and the murderer, maybe it's time to get somebody else to help you.
We would love to hear what folks, what are your scary developer stories? What are your nightmares? And how did you clean up from the crime scene? So share with us in the comments, find us on LinkedIn, and we may share them another time around the campfire on Two Voice Devs.
Two voice devs.